I know everyone thinks he's gone, but my son promised he'd come back. It's time to stop waiting.
A mother's heart doesn't forget a promise.
Why keep hurting yourself? Because one day you'll all understand.
Wait, does anyone else hear those cars? Luxury SUVs? In this neighborhood? Mom, I'm home.
Daniel?
What is happening? I'm sorry it took me so long to come back.
I don't care how many years have passed. Sarah, is he really your son? Yes.
I would have destroyed my mother's life. Leaving was the only way to keep her safe. Then who are they here for? They're here to protect my mother, because the people who ruined our lives have just found out I'm back.
Daniel's eyes, searching for the answers she had waited 20 years to hear. The expensive suit, the luxury vehicles, and the security surrounding him meant nothing to her. She only wanted to know whether her son had truly lived a peaceful life. Daniel's silence said more than words ever could. Every success he had achieved had come with sacrifice. The fortune he built had never erased the loneliness, the danger, or the memories of the night that changed everything. Returning to the village wasn't a celebration, it was a necessity. The curious neighbors watched every moment unfold. What had begun as gossip was slowly turning into fear. They realized Daniel wasn't hiding his past because he was ashamed of it. He was hiding it because revealing the truth could place everyone around him in danger. Then Daniel quietly admitted that someone was searching for him again, and if they discovered he had returned home, Sarah would become their first target. Her fled over the village as Daniel finally revealed what he had carried in his heart for years. His father's death had never been an accident. It had been carefully planned by powerful people who wanted complete control over the family business. They had erased evidence, silenced witnesses, and forced Sarah and her young son into a life of poverty and hiding. For 20 years, Sarah believed staying invisible was the only way to keep Daniel alive. She never wanted revenge. She only wanted her son to have a chance at a normal life. But Daniel had returned for a different reason. He wasn't back to remember the past. He had come to finish the fight his father never had the chance to complete. What no one realized was that the people responsible had already learned someone was asking questions. Disappeared behind the village. Daniel made a decision he had postponed for 2 decades. Running was no longer an option. He revealed that he already possessed enough evidence to expose the people responsible for his father's murder and the theft of his family's legacy. But there was one final piece missing, something his father had hidden before his death. Daniel believed that the missing clue had been with Sarah all along, although she had never understood its true importance. Sarah tried desperately to remember the final moments she had shared with her husband. Every word, every object, every small detail suddenly felt meaningful. Then, like a forgotten memory returning after many years, something flashed through her mind. She remembered an old wooden box that had remained untouched since the day her husband died. Without realizing it, Sarah had been protecting the family's greatest secret for the last 20 years. Sarah stood frozen, unable to say a single word. She searched her memory again and again, tried to remember if her husband had ever left her anything before the day he died. For years, she had believed that everything connected to him had disappeared with time. But Daniel's words awakened memories she had buried deep inside her heart. Daniel watched his mother carefully. He knew she wasn't lying. She simply didn't remember. 20 years had passed, and grief had a way of hiding even the most important moments. Still, he believed the answer was somewhere inside that small, aging house. Outside, the black SUVs remained parked, while Daniel's security team quietly monitored every corner of the street. The neighbors, who had mocked Sarah for years, now watched in complete silence. The poor widow they once pitied was suddenly surrounded by mystery, power, and unanswered questions. Daniel slowly walked toward the old house where he had spent his childhood. Every broken wall and faded photograph reminded him of the life that had been stolen from his family. But he wasn't there to relive the past. He had returned to uncover the truth that had remained hidden for 2 decades. As he stepped inside, his eyes landed on an old wooden box covered in dust, the same box his father had never allowed anyone to open. Daniel slowly picked up the dusty wooden box and gently brushed away the years of dirt covering its surface. The faded initials carved into the lid instantly took him back to his childhood. There was no doubt. It belonged to his father. Sarah stared at the box with trembling hands. A distant memory slowly returned. On the night before his death, her husband had placed the box in her hands and told her to keep it safe, no matter what happened. Overwhelmed by grief after losing him, she had locked it away and never opened it again. Daniel carefully tried the old lock, but it refused to move. Tom had sealed it shut. His security team searched the house for anything that might help, while every passing second made Daniel more anxious. He knew that whatever was hidden inside could expose the people responsible for destroying his family. Outside, the neighborhood remained unusually quiet. The curious whispers had disappeared, replaced by nervous silence. Unknown to everyone inside the house, a dark-colored car had stopped at the end of the street. Someone was watching the house from a distance. Daniel read the sentence over and over, his expression growing more serious with every passing second. Whoever had written it knew that one day he would come back. It wasn't just a warning. It was proof that his father had planned for this moment years before his death. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to her husband. For the first time in 20 years, she realized that he hadn't left behind a simple keepsake. He had left a message meant only for their son. Daniel turned the paper over, hoping to find another clue. At first, it looked blank. But when sunlight from the old window touched the page, faint markings began to appear. Hidden beneath the surface was a hand-drawn map. Within minutes, the convoy left the quiet neighborhood and headed toward the abandoned warehouse. Daniel sat silently in the lead vehicle, staring at the old map. Every turn on the road felt strangely familiar, as if his childhood memories were guiding him back to a place he had tried to forget. Sarah remained behind, unable to shake the fear growing inside her heart. She kept asking herself the same question. If her husband had hidden the truth for 20 years, what kind of secret was important enough to destroy an entire family? As Daniel's convoy approached the warehouse, the atmosphere changed. The building looked deserted, but something didn't feel right. Fresh tire tracks covered the muddy ground, and the main gate was hanging slightly open. Daniel signaled his security team to stop. Someone had arrived before them. The team cautiously entered the warehouse, searching every corner. Dust filled the black envelope, his hands steadier than his heartbeat. It had been sealed for years, untouched by time, as though his father had always believed this exact moment would come. He carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and an old photograph. The photograph showed Daniel's father standing beside 3 powerful businessmen. All 4 men were smiling at the camera, but one face caught Daniel's attention immediately. It belonged to a man who was now one of the country's most influential billionaires. The letter revealed an even darker truth. Years ago, the 4 men had built a successful company together. They had started as trusted partners, sharing the same dream. But when the business became worth billions, greed replaced loyalty. Daniel's father refused to sign illegal financial documents, exposing a massive fraud that could have sent the others to prison. Instead of admitting their crimes, the remaining partners chose betrayal. They destroyed his reputation, stole his share. The call ended before Daniel could say a single word. The silence that followed felt heavier than the threat itself. He stared at the phone, realizing that whoever had called wasn't guessing. They knew exactly where he was and what he had just discovered. Without hesitation, Daniel ordered half of his security team to return to his mother's house immediately. Every second mattered. If the warning was real, Sarah had very little time. The remaining guards searched every corner of the warehouse for surveillance cameras or hidden devices. They soon found fresh signs that someone had been watching the building for days. The enemy had expected Daniel to come. Meanwhile, Sarah sat alone inside her small house, unaware of the danger closing in. She quietly held the old photograph of her late husband, wondering if all the suffering of the past 20 years had been part of a much larger plan. Outside, a black van slowly stopped across the street. 2 men stepped out without attracting attention. One of them looked toward the house, checked a photo on his phone, and gave a silent nod. They crossed the road, reached Sarah's front door, and one of them slowly reached for the doorknob. Just as the doorknob began to turn, Daniel's security team arrived at full speed. The sound of screeching tires shattered the silence, forcing the two strangers to step back. Within seconds, the quiet street turned into chaos. Realizing they had been seen, the men rushed back toward the black van. One of Daniel's guards chased them on foot, while another blocked the road with an SUV. But the attackers had planned their escape well. The van crashed through a narrow side lane and disappeared before anyone could stop it. Inside the house, Sarah was shaken but unharmed. She finally understood that Daniel had been telling the truth all along. Someone really wanted to erase every remaining piece of their family. Daniel arrived a few minutes later and found his mother safe. Relief washed over him, but it lasted only a moment. One of the guards handed him a small object that had fallen from the fleeing van. It was a silver key with an unusual symbol engraved on it. Daniel recognized the symbol instantly. It was the original logo of the company his father had built before it was stolen from him. If the attackers were carrying that key, it could only mean one thing. The people behind his father's murder still had access to secrets that had never been uncovered. Daniel turned the silver key over in his hand, studying every detail. The engraved company logo wasn't the only thing that caught his attention. Along the edge of the key, a tiny number had been carved so carefully that it was almost invisible. 47. It wasn't a random number. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember where he had seen it before. Then it hit him. Years ago, his father had often mentioned Locker 47, but Daniel had always assumed it was related to work and never asked about it. Without wasting another minute, Daniel searched through his father's old documents. Hidden inside one of the notebooks was the name of a private storage facility that had been closed for nearly 20 years. The building was still standing. If Locker 47 had never been opened, it might contain the evidence his father couldn't protect with him. But Daniel also realized something else. The men who attacked Sarah weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to stop Daniel from reaching the locker before they did. As the convoy headed toward the forgotten storage facility, Daniel had no idea that someone was already waiting inside, holding the only key that could open Locker 47. The convoy reached the abandoned storage facility just before sunrise. Rust covered the massive entrance gate, and the building looked as though it had been forgotten for decades. Yet Daniel immediately noticed something unusual. The lock on the front gate had been cut recently. Someone had entered before them. Daniel signaled his security team to spread out while he walked deeper into the silent building. Rows of old lockers stretched into the darkness, each covered with dust, except one. Locker 47. Its surface had fresh fingerprints. Daniel inserted the silver key with a steady hand. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked open. Inside, there wasn't money or jewelry. There was a sealed metal case, a leather-bound journal, and a small digital recorder. Daniel opened the journal first. The very first page carried a handwritten message from his father. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect our family, but now it's your turn to protect the truth." Before Daniel could read another page, a loud metallic sound echoed through the warehouse. The heavy entrance door slammed shut. The lights suddenly went out, and in the darkness, someone else's footsteps began moving toward Locker 47. The sound of footsteps echoed through the darkness, growing louder with every passing second. Daniel remained still, refusing to panic. He carefully closed the journal, secured the metal case, and handed the digital recorder to one of his most trusted guards. A flashlight suddenly cut through the darkness. A lone figure slowly emerged from the far end of the hallway. It wasn't one of Daniel's security guards. The elderly man raised both hands to show he wasn't carrying a weapon. His face looked tired, but his eyes were filled with recognition. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old man quietly said Daniel's name. He introduced himself as Michael, his father's former accountant. For 20 years, Michael had lived in hiding, waiting for the day Daniel would return. He revealed that Daniel's father had trusted only 2 people with the truth, and Michael was the last survivor. He warned Daniel not to hand the evidence to the police yet. According to the truth hidden for decades was finally starting to come together. Daniel and Michael carefully connected every piece of evidence they had discovered. The old documents, the forgotten records, and the hidden messages from his father revealed a shocking reality. The person responsible for destroying their family was someone with enormous power and influence. For years, that person had lived a respected life while hiding the darkest secrets behind a successful empire. Sarah struggled to accept the truth. The man who had taken everything from her family was not just a stranger. He was someone who had been connected to her husband's past. Daniel knew the danger was growing. Every step closer to the truth made him a bigger target. But this time, he was no longer the helpless child who had lost his father. He had the evidence, the courage, and the determination to expose everything. Meanwhile, the billionaire realized that Daniel had uncovered something he was never supposed to find. And for the first time in many years, the man who controlled everything started feeling afraid. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Michael's final words. If they were true, then everything he believed about his past had been incomplete. The man he had spent years hunting wasn't just connected to his father's death. He was connected to Daniel's life in a way no one had imagined. Back at the safe house, Daniel carefully opened the sealed metal case. Inside were original company contracts, bank records, and several photographs that had never been made public. Hidden beneath them was a faded birth certificate. Daniel unfolded it with trembling hands. His name was written clearly across the top, but the section marked father had been crossed out in black ink. Attached beside, it was a handwritten note from Daniel's late father. Blood doesn't make a man your father. Love does. Sarah stared at the note, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, she admitted there was a secret she had never found the courage to tell Daniel. She had promised her husband that the truth would remain hidden until the day their family was strong enough to face it. Daniel looked at his mother, waiting for the answer he had searched for his entire life. Sarah took a deep breath and finally spoke the name of the man who had been hiding behind power, wealth, and respect for more than 20 years. The name left Sarah's lips so quietly that, for a moment, Daniel thought he had misheard it. But when she repeated it, there was no doubt. It was the same billionaire whose smiling face appeared in the old photograph beside Daniel's father. The room fell completely silent. Every clue, every warning, and every sacrifice suddenly fit together. The man who had spent decades presenting himself as a respected businessman had secretly destroyed the very family that helped build his fortune. Sarah finally revealed the truth she had hidden for 20 years. On the night Daniel's father was killed, he had begged her to protect the child at any cost. He knew the billionaire would never stop searching if he learned the truth. So they changed records, erased identities, and disappeared into poverty, believing that living unnoticed was the only way Daniel could survive. Daniel realized that everything his parents had lost had been a sacrifice to keep him alive. Now, there was nothing left to hide. He gathered every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence into a single file. This time, he wasn't preparing for revenge. He was preparing to expose the truth before the entire country. But just as Daniel reached for his phone to make the evidence public, every screen in the room suddenly went black. A single message appeared. You have 1 hour to choose, your mother or the truth. The message stayed on the screen for only a few seconds before disappearing. No sender, no trace, just a countdown that had already begun. Daniel looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at his mother. The people behind the threats had forced him into an impossible choice. If he exposed the truth, Sarah's life could be over within the hour. If he stayed silent, his father's killers would remain free forever. Instead of reacting emotionally, Daniel made a different decision. He divided the evidence into several encrypted copies and sent them to people he trusted in different cities. If anything happened to him or Sarah, every file would be released automatically. For the first time in years, the balance of power began to shift. The billionaire believed he was controlling Daniel through fear. He had no idea Daniel had already planned for that possibility. Meanwhile, the billionaire sat inside his luxurious office, watching live security footage from hidden cameras. Confident that Daniel would surrender, he smiled. But that smile slowly disappeared when one of his assistants rushed into the room with a breaking news alert. Someone had leaked a small portion of the company's secret financial records. It wasn't enough to destroy the empire, but it was enough to make the billionaire realize one terrifying truth. Daniel was no longer running. He was coming for everything. The following morning, the entire country woke to shocking headlines. More evidence had been released overnight. Financial records, hidden recordings, and signed documents exposed years of corruption that no amount of money could erase. Government investigators moved quickly. Offices were raided, company accounts were frozen, and several former executives were taken into custody. The empire that had taken decades to build began collapsing in a single day. The billionaire tried to escape on a private jet, believing his wealth could still protect him. But before the aircraft could leave the runway, law enforcement surrounded it. His journey ended where justice finally began. Standing outside the courthouse, Daniel wasn't smiling. Winning had never been about becoming richer or more powerful. It was about giving his father the justice he had been denied and allowing his mother to live without fear for the first time in 20 years. Sarah looked at her son with tears of relief. The tiny house that people once mocked had become a symbol of courage, patience, and hope. The same neighbors who had laughed at the poor widow now stood quietly, ashamed of how they had judged her. Daniel never sought revenge. He sought the truth, and in the end, the truth proved stronger than money, influence, or fear. Moral: never judge someone's worth by their appearance. The quietest people often carry the greatest strength, and while lies may survive for years, the truth always finds its way